Thank you for being here.
Yeah, I'm so sorry I was a couple minutes late.
It happens.
My kiddos needed me this morning, and
Life
I promise
happens.
if I ever have to choose between you and them, I promise I'll be late.
They needed you, we needed you, but I think you made the right choice. So I want to start with in a kind of a weird place with a story. So I last saw you in Reagan Airport in Washington, D.C. last Thursday night.
I was hoping you wouldn't do this. Yes, you did.
So I show up at the airport in Washington, D.C. on Thursday night, and I go through security, and I'm walking to the gate, and I run into you.
Yes.
There you are. And so I said hi, and I was traveling with somebody, and I said, this is a flight when a lot of elected officials go back to Austin. I always see people in the gate, and we go sit down and talk. My friend and I, you went off wherever you went, and then you texted me and said, John Cornyn's also on this plane. Uh-huh. And I thought to myself,
we sat next to each other and went.
I thought this is a, well, I want to ask you about that. So I thought this is a viral moment in the making here, right? What I wanted to do was have an impromptu debate at 30,000 feet on TikTok, right?
So did I, but he was
great.
boarding an A1 and I was at C40.
Right, and because you were in the A group
us.
and he's in the C group and he's traveling with his wife, here's what
he's always A1.
Here's what I'm imagining. Cornyn and his wife get an aisle seat and a window seat. They put a jacket on the middle seat like everybody else, hoping nobody sits there. And then you walk on the plane in the C group and you say to him, is
right
that seat taken?
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
Did you talk to him?
No, if I'd been in the B group, maybe I would have the chance to do that. But I was, like I said, C40 on a Southwest flight, so you know where I sat.
So there was no moment where you and Cornyn were able to have a kind of informal conversation.
No, there wasn't. Just like there was no moment for a conversation when I was trying to open jobs for women and I wasn't on his donor list. You know, there was also an empty middle seat.
I see what you did there. You actually.
There was another middle seat empty next to Evan when I boarded, and I.
Yeah, you walked by and I did this like I always do, right?
I see one back there, Evan. It's good to see you. But
all right, so no conversation with Cornyn. So there'll be plenty of time to talk about him today.
Yeah.
I want to talk about you. I'm going to ask you the same question that I've now asked Senator West and Ms. Zinzon, and I will ask other candidates for this straightforward. Why are you qualified to be a United States Senator?
You know, I think we don't have enough people in office that are regular working people who have faced the challenges that our legislators have been charged with finding solutions to. So that's actually a different question than I was expecting, is why are you running? I like this question better. Why am I qualified to be a U.S. Senator? Because we need more representative government. We need more combat veterans in office who understand the price of putting boots on the ground someplace. We need more working moms in office who understand how scary it is to be trying to choose between providing ourselves with health care and feeding our children. We need more, people who in office who are concerned about saving Social Security and are depending on that instead of what we have right now, which are career politicians, John Cornyn, relying on 3 taxpayer-funded pensions. So I'm qualified to serve because I am a Texan. I've lived in this state since I was 7. I got here as soon as I could.
Yep. Me too.
And I believe that I have shown that I have what it takes. I have the integrity. I have the servant leadership. I have the ability to build broad coalitions of support for things and actually get stuff done.
So it's life experience. You present yourself both on paper and in person as a mom and as a small businesswoman and as a veteran. Of course, we'll come to that in a second. That's the case. Now, of course, John Cornyn was a regular person before he got elected the first time. Everybody is a regular person before they get elected the first time.
We have a lot of lawyers in office.
Right.
That's nothing against lawyers. I actually love lawyers. Lawyers helped me overturn the ban on women serving in combat. My mom's a paralegal.
So you want just a different kind of life experience?
Yes. I think, regardless of if he was a regular person, he's been there too long. He's been statewide politician in Texas for almost 4 decades.
So just quickly, because you brought that up, I don't want to get too far down the path on this. Are you saying that you think that there should be a time limit or a term limit on service in office?
I support term limits, yeah.
Okay, so when you tell the voters, should you be the nominee, you run against John Cornyn in the fall, you will tell them that you will serve how many terms and no more? Tell me right now.
Well, I don't actually think it's effective for people running to term limit themselves, because then the people who stay in office...
Beto did it.
Well, and I would argue... I think that's a mistake to term limit yourself, because then you get to a point where maybe you're needed and maybe you're still needed. Maybe there's, you have the majority by 1 seat or something like that.
And
right?
experience matters.
What I'm here to tell you is I will vote for term limits. I will put forward term limits. I support term limits.
And you'll live under whatever proposal goes forward.
I would rather not limit myself while other people are not limited.
So we've passed the filing deadline. We now know what the shape of this race looks like. No Beto. There he is, breaking hearts again, right, all over the state. There are 12 of you in this race, right, as I understand it. what is the affirmative case for you versus them? I mean, you talked about your life experience, but they're all going to sit here and they're all going to say, I'm a mom. I mean, I had Ms. Zinzun here talk about her 2-year-old son, Santi, when she was here. I'm a mom. I've done this. I've done that. Everybody has their version of that conversation.
Of course, yeah.
You've got to differentiate yourself from the pack. Why you and not the other 11?
Well, first of all, can we acknowledge how amazing it is that we have 12 people in the race? I think that that's great. Having been raised here, I don't remember the last time that we had competitive primaries for statewide offices for Democrats, and it's really exciting.
Yeah.
And the same thing that's driving that is why we're going to win in November, and that's because John Cornyn is vulnerable, and there is enormous grassroots enthusiasm and energy for replacing him. So it's very exciting to me to see so many great people stepping up to run. Now, I believe we will be victorious in the primary for a couple reasons. One, people, we don't want to see the same types of candidates get fielded. We don't want to see more politicians, more lawyers get fielded, more people that are kind of in the echo chamber, in the political echo chamber. I won't speak ill against my primary partners. It's not in my nature to throw daggers at people who are, who share my values and are supporting the things that I'm supporting and trying to move the needle on the things I'm trying to move.
So you're willing to talk smack about Cornyn, but not about the people you have to climb over to get to him?
I don't think I'm climbing over them. I feel like we're walking arm in arm in the same direction, and one of us will step forward after the primary. I believe it will be me because I think that the primary voters want to beat Cornyn, and they will see that we agree on very many policy positions. There's not that much policy that differentiates us. What's going to differentiate us is viability. We have not fielded a combat veteran as a Democrat in a statewide election in a state like Texas that's so pro-military and patriotic. And I think that people are going to see that I've got the best chance to beat Cornyn.
So you've landed on then the thing that you think of all the aspects of your life experience you think differentiates you. I mean, I see you in
It's
ads.
not just being a combat vet, though. It's being a disruptor. So not just being a veteran who goes along and does as they're told, being a veteran who took on the Pentagon, took on the establishment, took on Jeff Sessions, took on D.C. and won.
That's the thing. As I look back through the way you ran the last race for Congress and the way you've at least run this race so far, you do seem to be presenting toughness as the differentiator. You know, the picture of you on your website is you with your tattoos. There you were in an ad riding a motorcycle.
I'm presenting who I am.
You're presenting, yes, but let's accept that the who you are you're presenting is, you're on the Texas Monthly podcast this week, and you told my friend Andy Langer that you thought that Washington, D.C. needed a kick in the ass. This is not the way that every candidate talks. And the image that you're presenting of yourself through your life experience is of somebody who, whether people buy this or not, want this or not, is somebody who is tougher than everybody else.
Yes, and I have had people say that they think that the way that I present and I don't sound like a politician, and most people love that. Some people worry, and I just kind of point to people like Ann Richards, and there's plenty of people who've been successful who are successful because they're authentic and because they're saying the things that everybody's thinking.
Let's understand where the Democratic Party is right now. The Democratic Party is having a conversation about the continuum. I had this conversation when Mr. Zinzun was here about the continuum, the spectrum within the Democratic Party. It goes from left to middle, moderate. People place themselves along different places on that spectrum. And in fact, at the presidential race, we're having a whole conversation about giving away a whole bunch of free stuff on the one end. Is socialism really a thing? Or are we all going to have to release our list of clients at McKinsey? I mean, there's like a whole debate going on about where you land on the continuum. Put yourself on that continuum. Where do you fit on the Democratic Party axis?
I reject the premise. I don't think it's a line. I think it's a sphere, because there's certain things where you're further left or further moderate on, and then, it just doesn't make any sense for me to put it in a line.
It's not all one or all the other.
Yeah, and I mean, depending on the issue, I'm in a different place in that sphere.
Right.
So you already know the answer to this question, Evan. I'm not a progressive or a moderate Democrat. I'm an ass-kicking, motorcycle-riding, tattooed Democrat. I'm a Texas Democrat. I'm a Texas woman who's a Democrat.
But what does that tell the average voter trying to sort through the pile of 12 about where you land ideologically? Because the energy in the party right now is largely on the more progressive end of that conversation.
Let me tell you what it tells voters. Yeah. Because most voters, when I am out, I've driven over 10,000 miles across the state. Right. I have been all over this state, multiple places, repeated times, not just hitting one to say I've been there. And I've talked to thousands of voters, and there are very few of them asking me policy differentiation questions. They're asking, how do I keep food on the table? I'm working 2 or 3 jobs. I'm concerned about my kids facing climate change. They want to talk about gun safety. They want to talk about things that we're not talking about in the echo chamber and in the headlines. Things like, how do we keep good teachers in rural schools? How do my kids grow up in this rural town and find a job so that they can stay here so I can watch my grandkids grow up instead of having to go to a city? So, so many people are looking at who they're going to vote for, and I'm here to tell you the vast majority of them are not looking for finding a candidate to agree with every single policy position that they have. They're looking for character. They're looking for behavioral patterns. They're looking for how you make decisions, how you build your team, how you are going to legislate, because they don't want to have to pay attention to every vote. They want to trust you're going to go to D.C. and fight for them and not sell them out. So what I talk to voters about is not what I'm going to do when I get to D.C. Because when you hire somebody for a job, you don't ask them what they're going to do in that job. You say, what have you done? So I tell them what I've done.
Well, I would disagree with you. I actually think people do want to know what you're going to do. They want to know what they're buying. And that's where you begin to articulate the case on different issues.
Right, but
that
look at
gives them
John
a sense
Cornyn
of how
versus
you-
Ted Cruz.
Right.
John Cornyn versus Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz has a 52% approval rating and John Cornyn has a 35. How does that happen when they vote very similarly and ideologically they support the same things? It's because of their leadership style and how Ted Cruz is a disruptor and cut his teeth politically disrupting the Republican establishment, whereas John Cornyn does as he's told.
So you have a
smartly
kind word for
and-
Ted Cruz in that respect, whether you agree with him or disagree
I
with
don't,
him.
because I actually don't think that's how he is. That's the perception of him.
Right.
He's built a brand of being that, but I think that once he got there, he sold
Let
out.
me
And
come
people
back
are
to the
tired
pri-
of
yeah,
sending
right.
ass kickers to D.C., people they think are, and then watching them sell out to big special interests and big money.
Let me come back to the primary for a second. I know you don't want to talk smack about your other primary opponents, but I'm going to force you into a conversation about one. So,
Good luck, many have tried.
well, let's see if it works. So Christina Zinzun was a guest on Alec Baldwin's podcast last week. This is a podcast that he does every other week out of WNYC, the public radio station in New York. I remember when Patton Oswalt and other people endorsed you. You were Hollywood Hegar all of a sudden. Maybe she's Tinseltown Zinzun now, because she's also cavorting with her own version of the celebrity class. Alec Baldwin has endorsed her candidacy for the Senate. He apparently met her back in her Workers' Defense Project days. So she's on this interview, and he says to her, "Tell me about your opponent." And I thought, opponent, singular, as opposed to opponents, plural, but she took the bait, and she said, this is exactly what she said. "Tell me about your opponent." And she said, "MJ Hegar, who ran for Congress and lost, and is a more moderate Democrat than me." She wants to make it about you. She didn't say, "I've got 11 opponents." She said, "MJ Hegar, who ran for Congress and lost, and is a more moderate Democrat than me." She wants to make it a two-person race, it sounds like.
Well, it is a two-person race. It's me and John Cornyn, because my opponent is John Cornyn.
But you have to get over, but Ms. Hager, you've got to get over
I
the
don't see it that
primary.
way. I see, if I'm selected to go
Right.
against John Cornyn, I'll beat him. If I'm not, I'll go back to trying to make this world a safer place for my kids.
But is the framing...
I understand
Yeah.
there's a primary.
Right.
I'm not
You've
going to
gotta
be
get through-
arrogant.
gotta get through
It's
the
not that
primary.
I'm taking it
Right.
for granted.
Right.
It's that I don't have the luxury of focusing on multiple elections. We need the entire year and every penny to beat John Cornyn, and that's what's important.
You reject the framing. I mean, I'm interested. Moderate has been in some
have
quarters a
rejected
four-letter
political
word
framing
this year. Yeah.
for
Right.
years, and that's how I've been effective.
Is
frankly.
moderate a cuss word in this primary?
I mean, I don't know. I think it depends on the issue. There's a couple issues that if you're moderate on, I think I would be a little offended. So I really just think I do think it's a problem that we demonize people that are kind of in the middle. I will say I think that there's something interesting going on in Texas where a third of our state is self-identifying as independent.
Independent, that's right.
But that doesn't mean moderate. That's a really common mistake that I want to clear up right now, that just because you're independent does not mean you're moderate. It does not mean you're in between the two parties and you just can't make up your mind.
It means you're
It means you're
unaffiliated, right?
outside of the
Right.
two-party system. You see people in both parties you don't like.
Yeah.
You see aspects of both parties you don't like or you do like. Most times I hear people say I'm a fiscally conservative social moderate or social liberal. And you know what? People are starting to realize they can't just trust one party or another party, and they need to start voting for the right person with integrity and
Right.
servant leadership who has shown that they're willing to sacrifice their ambition for their community.
Right.
You know my life's ambition.
Yeah.
It was not to be a senator.
Right.
It was to be Han Solo, to be a combat pilot. And I gave that up to fight for women in the military.
Right, but you don't reject the label of, even though what you're saying is, I think what you're saying is largely true. You are a Democrat.
I am a Democrat.
At least one of your
I'm
primary
a Democrat
opponents has
because I
questioned-
believe that health care is a human right, that women should have autonomy over their own bodies, that we need a comprehensive immigration reform, that we have to protect LGBTQ communities. I mean, clearly, yes,
And that's
I'm a
consistent with the
Democrat.
Democratic Party,
Right.
with the Democratic Party platform. So where Ms. Inson is right is you did lose a congressional race. So let's talk about the congressional race. It was a very close race.
Part of what has made me so successful is how I define lose.
So talk about that.
Yeah,
because-
I don't think that was a loss. Because my only goal was not to get myself into office and get a nice brass nameplate. My goal was to stop making people think they can be safe legislators, because safe legislators are dangerous for our democracy.
Right.
And John Carter thought he was a safe congressman, and he was legislating so.
Well, a loss is a term that is
We flipped two state house
definitionally-
seats in that district, and he voted for the Violence Against Women Act. So we're racking up wins still from that race.
But it's definitionally accurate that you lost. But let me grant you this: that district had not been remotely competitive until this last cycle. I think he won the previous race over the last Democrat by 22 points.
And he won his last midterm by 32.
Right, and so you held him to below 3. You did a little bit worse than Beto in that district in both Bell and Williamson,
And
a
I
little bit worse-
outperformed him in the rural half of the district.
Right.
Which is going to be important in a statewide election.
What did you learn about that race? It was your first time running. What did you learn about that race that helps you think about this race?
I learned that I think military leadership style is really effective in how to run a campaign and how to represent voters.
Yep.
And that is a collaborative leadership style, understanding that you don't have all the answers, understanding you're not the smartest person in the room and you need to bring in other voices, and that if you want to talk about an issue that you are not the expert on, you need to bring in people who have experience with those issues. For
Yep.
example, education. I am very passionate about public education,
Right.
but I am not a public school teacher. So anytime something new comes up or a solution or a proposal, I don't
Yeah.
just give an opinion. I go and talk to rural teachers and talk to people, right?
Yeah.
So I learned that was very effective. I learned that being a combat veteran gets my foot in the door in some of the rural areas where people may be open to hearing other options because they're a little terrified of what they're seeing right now. So we have a state that's very, pro-military, very wants to support the troops. National security is very important to us. And that used to mean you voted a certain way if that was your most important issue. And now we have a current administration who's ruining our relationships with our allies, who's disrespecting our military left and right, robbing the military construction budget to build a wall, emboldening our enemies.
So you think the
people are looking for leadership.
and they're open to having a conversation with
They're open to the
with
conversation.
candidates or parties that maybe they were not open to having a conversation with before.
Bingo. And I
Because if
was
you think
raised
about-
in rural Texas,
Yeah,
so I know how to talk to people.
And that's the point. If you think about the other major candidates in this race, Mr. Bell's from Houston, Ms. Edwards is from Houston, Ms. Inzun is from Austin, Mr. West is from Dallas. You represent,
Rural Texas.
well, or you're from, it's flipping, it's suburban in some respects and rural in other respects, but you represent a part of the state where you're having a conversation with a different kind, you have a familiarity with a different kind of voter.
Absolutely.
Right, having run that. So let's assume you climb over the primary and you're now the nominee of the party. Are you running against John Cornyn or Donald Trump in the fall?
100% John Cornyn.
You are. So
Yeah.
you don't nationalize this race. One
That's
theory of the case is the only way
very
to make
critical.
this a truly competitive race is to tie it to the hot garbage pile happening nationally.
Well, the hot garbage pile that's happening nationally is Mitch McConnell and the obstruction in the Senate. The things that are happening in the Senate we can't even get a vote on an election security bill just because it happens to benefit his party. Are you kidding me? I mean, people hate a lapdog in Texas. Texans hate a lapdog, and they hate a lackey, and they hate somebody who, has to ask their party leadership before they vote or before they open their mouth and
So
speak.
the theory of your theory of the case against Cornyn is that he's basically Mitch McConnell's lackey.
100%.
That's it.
Yeah. That he's putting his party
Right.
ahead of his country.
Yeah. But of course, this has been a state that has for years and years and years voted with the party in control of the Senate.
The people who have shown up to vote, yes.
Well, but as a practical matter, this is the debate you have all the time. Is it a red state or a non-voting state? It's a red state because it's a non-voting state. Until you change the latter, you're not going to change the former. So it's a red state. It's a conservative state. Maybe the state wants Mitch McConnell's style of politics in the Senate based on election results for the last 25 years.
I think that there are a lot of people who have voted that way over the last 40 years, my family members included, by the way.
Yeah.
Because they were fiscally conservative, patriotic, pro-military, family values, and they don't see those things reflected back right now.
Yeah.
They don't see a party that supports the military. They don't see a party that's fiscally responsible.
Right.
They don't see a party that is supporting rural areas or the working class. They see a party doing a tax reform for the top 1% and for corporations. They see a party obstructing, protecting our democracy from Russia because it's in their party's best interest.
So
the Texas Lyceum polling, I don't look at polling, right? Polling is very flawed.
Well, you like polls that have you in first, I'm sure.
No, actually, many polls that have me in first, you can go back and look at interviews that I've done with reporters that I've said, please don't look at the polling.
Right.
It's ludicrous. This far out, the small sample sizes,
nobody knows
it doesn't
who
have
you
all
guys
of the
are.
candidates
Right,
in.
yeah.
Well, we're a year out.
Yeah, right.
So, but the Texas Lyceum did an interesting poll because it wasn't likely voters and it wasn't politicized. It was really about corruption and voter suppression and gerrymandering. And there was a huge number of people who were self-identifying as Republicans. I think it was somewhere around 80%, but don't quote me on that. You'll have to fact check that for me, or I'll fact check it and I'll get back to you. But it was a huge swath of people that were against voter suppression and gerrymandering and corruption and money in politics and all of the things you think of as there's a difference between people who have been voting Republican and Republican legislators.
But there's a misalignment, though, when you ask those same people about specific candidates, specific races, they don't set up the same way. So you've got to make the connect between the issues that you say those people are concerned about and the actual race. That's the challenge.
You know what I hear at least once a day on average, I'll say, because I hear it like 3 times a day, is people shaking hands with me who started off skeptical, who said, I'm going to vote for you. You're the first Democrat I'm going to vote for. And I say, thank you for your vote. I won't be the last.
Yeah.
We're going to run a tightly, heavily coordinated campaign this cycle that's going to benefit up and down the ballot. It's time.
You've told me something that's interesting. So you're going to be targeting not just Democrats. You're not trying to run up the score in the big cities. You are consciously going to be going after independents and persuadable Republicans. That's your theory of the case in this race.
We will not take our eye off the places where we have high ROI. That's a mistake. But it is also a mistake to leave behind places that have been written off in the past.
Could you make the math work if you just ran up the numbers in the blue parts of the state? Could you win? Beto couldn't.
I don't think you can, but I don't think you should, more importantly.
Yeah.
I don't think you should.
Yeah.
I think you should earn representing this entire giant state with this diverse population, and the way you earn that is by driving the entire state, shaking hands with people, getting out of the echo chamber, getting out of your comfort zone, talking to people who you don't expect will immediately agree with you. I've gone into places that had Confederate flags, and there were people that were like, don't go in there, and I said, absolutely not, we're going in.
Yeah. So you say you're not going to make this about Trump. You're not going to nationalize this race. We're not going to hear his name then for the.
You're not going to hear it from my mouth.
Will you talk about impeachment?
I mean,
during this campaign?
I will answer questions to voters who ask me about it, and I have, like I said, driven over 10,000 miles and talked to thousands of people and have yet to be asked that by a voter.
No voter is talking to you
Not
or
a
asking
single
you about
one.
impeachment.
Not while they're working 2 or 3 jobs to get
Yeah.
food on the table and choosing between paying their rent and buying prescriptions.
Right. Well, that's the president's theory of the case, is that the public largely doesn't care, that this is an echo chamber deal in Washington and a small subset of a small subset cares about this, but the public does not.
It's incredibly important, but I would argue that what's important to voters is what's helping them get food on the table and protect their kids.
As a practical matter, since you said you're answering questions about this, you are for impeachment? You think the president should be removed?
I think that we need to respect the process. I think the legislative branch has a constitutional obligation of oversight and checks and balances. It concerns me when I hear things like John Cornyn saying he's not interested in looking at the evidence. That's putting your party ahead of
he'll be
your
a juror
oath to the
here.
Constitution.
Presumably he'll be a juror.
Well, I'm hoping he actually takes the time out of his busy schedule and climbs down out of his ivory tower to look at the evidence.
Right.
I believe there is ample evidence, but I am not going to tell you that I'm going to vote a certain way until I see all of the evidence.
So you supported the inquiry. You did support that in the House.
I support checks and balances and oversight, and the inquiry was that.
And you would be, if you were in the Senate right now, you'd be listening to the evidence, but you've not made your mind up yet as to whether he should be impeached.
Well, I mean, I'd be listening to the evidence. I do think I've seen ample evidence from the president's own mouth and, from the things that he's tweeted and the testimony of the patriots who have, in a nonpartisan way come forward with a concern for our country.
I want to ask you about some issues, and again, the best way to understand the issues that you think are important are the ones that you talk about in the course of this campaign. And I want to ask you about a handful of those. You have accused John Cornyn of shilling for the gun lobby. What does that mean?
So 2 weeks after the El Paso shooting, he cashed a check from the NRA. A couple days after the Midland, Odessa shooting, and I was in Midland when this happened. I was driving through West Texas, and I had a very emotional experience with that.
Yeah.
Being in rooms of people and talking to them while we were not sure if the active shooter situation had been handled even. It was a really gut-wrenching experience. And watching videos where children are screaming in terror and hearing automatic rifle fire in the background, it had a huge impact on me. And I think about the response that I had to that, and then hearing a couple days later that the Republican senators went into a room to talk about gun safety. What are we going to do about gun safety? Two of those people were John Cornyn and Ted Cruz, who had just come from Midland, Odessa, and El Paso shootings.
Yeah.
And by the way, the Midland, Odessa shooter tried to buy a weapon and failed a background check, and then obtained a weapon through a private sale where a background check wasn't required. So when they came out of talking about gun safety, somebody asked them, where did you guys land on background checks? And they said it didn't come up. Not, well, we talked about it and we think it's blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
It didn't come up. It didn't come up is an answer you would expect from a boardroom from Smith & Wesson, not from a group of people purportedly representing a country, 90% of whom support universal background checks.
So your belief is that I'm hearing what you're saying, that John Cornyn, you believe, is carrying water for the gun industry and is not advocating for the people he represents.
100%, but it's not just sales of guns to us. It's trafficking. Nobody's talking about trafficking. We send 250,000 weapons across our southern border every year. 80% of the violence, the gun violence in Mexico, is from guns bought in the U.S., and then we complain about the humanitarian crisis that the violence is causing at our southern border.
So let me ask you,
That's big business.
Game show speed round, yes or no?
You know I don't do those.
Universal background checks, yes or no?
I don't do speed rounds.
Well, then do it slower.
Because they don't provide context, and they are divisive, and they are uninformed.
Are you for, the public
100% for universal background checks. I have called for an end to open carry. I have called for tighter trafficking laws. I have called for fully funding the CDC to continue their research, and I don't care what anyone says the CDC needs to research. No, we don't need more research to know we have a problem, but we do need research into what's causing the incel community and the domestic violence that is at the root of a lot of mass shootings. We need to understand domestic violence, accidental shootings, suicide. We have so much work to do, and we can do it. Don't be overwhelmed that there's too much to do. Do you guys remember when the seatbelt laws were constitutionally, infringing on our constitutional rights? Because I do. I'm old enough to remember that.
And now we accept the fact that that's
And now you get in a car,
safety.
and it's like we shame each other. Until we get there, where responsible gun owners are policing ourselves. I am one, by the way, and we're shaming each other for not locking them up in the safe and not being responsible and not, we need to have more liability on gun owners. A dog gets out of your backyard and bites someone, and that's worse than if somebody gets their hands on your guns. It's ridiculous. We can change the culture, but we can't do it with employees of the gun lobby writing our laws.
You just pass by the fact that you worked in there. I am for getting rid of open carry.
Yes.
This is not an insignificant conversation. Now,
Agreed.
first of all, that's a state issue. State passed this legislature several sessions ago.
Yes.
Why do you think, this is as you know, this is a state with a proud tradition of the Second Amendment. There are a lot of people in the state who own guns, and there are responsible gun owners.
And open carry is threatening our Second Amendment rights.
Explain.
Because it is an assault on bystanders. Because I was at Pecan Street Festival, and some guy thought he needed to walk around with a bullhorn and a backpack full of, signs sticking out of it, yelling, and he's carrying an automatic rifle. I told my kids, I don't care that you have half a dragon painted on your face. Let's go. We're out of here. And that's how a lot of people felt. And that is not our Second Amendment in action. That is somebody who is actually hurting our Second Amendment rights by pushing things in people's faces and making us feel unsafe and dividing us further and demonizing gun owners, I might add.
Can you sell that in the parts of the state that you say you need to win? Could
It came from those parts.
Could you have sold that in Bell County in the last congressional race?
It came from those parts. I was talking to a group of women in the rural side of Fort Worth who happened to all mention that they were carrying. It was actually not a political event, and they did not know I was a political candidate. This was early in the race. Yeah. And they happened a scuffle happened. It was actually a tracker for me, but they didn't know that because they didn't know.
From another campaign.
From John Cornyn's campaign. It wasn't paid for by John Cornyn's campaign, but a super PAC that the guy introduced himself to me as your John Cornyn's tracker. So I want to be clear that it probably wasn't paid for by his campaign, but that's who it was. So ironically, that's happening in the corner. They don't know what's going on over there, so they bring up the fact that one of the ladies said, I got to go get my purse. And I was like, well, that's a weird thing to say. And then they said, oh, it's because we're all packing. Because we're Fort Worth ladies. And I was like, well, this is an interesting opportunity. I have a little focus group I can talk to.
Right.
And I said, ladies, what do you think we can do about the gun violence epidemic? I just wanted to hear their thoughts, right? And they started talking, and we were brainstorming, and I said, what do you guys think about open carry? And immediately they were like, oh, it's so stupid. I don't understand it. You should have to get your concealed carry if you feel like you need to carry. But open carry, all that does is piss people off and scare people.
So you'll talk about this the point is you'll talk about this every place you go.
My point is we got to stop asking ourselves what's politically tenable and start asking ourselves what are the solutions that can keep our kids safe.
What about the assault weapon question? You know, Congressman O'Rourke got into it a little bit during the presidential race when he talked about mandatory buybacks. One person's mandatory buyback is another person's confiscation. Where are you on a ban on assault weapons, and B, going the extra place where Congressman O'Rourke went and saying we should remove them from the hands of people who lawfully own them now?
I think we need to start owning how we talk about these things and apply the science of change management tactics and techniques to these things and start realizing that word choice is really important. So I think that we should stop selling weapons of war to the public. I'm a combat veteran. I'm a medevac pilot. I have medevaced hundreds of people, and I know what these weapons do to a body. I don't want these weapons on the street. I think we need to stop selling these weapons to the public.
Should you require people to sell them to the government or sell them back to whomever?
If I thought that would work, I would be all for it. The problem is that I think that responsible gun owners are going to be the ones standing in line to return those weapons, and it's the people who we have to worry about that are actually going to commit these crimes that will not.
On, pardon me, healthcare, which is an issue that you know, having worked in the healthcare industry previously.
Yes.
You made this a tenet, a fundamental part of your congressional race. What you've said is affordable healthcare, and specifically a public option for anyone who wants it.
Yes.
That is not Medicare for all.
It's Medicare available for all.
It's Medicare, well, I'm thinking about Mayor Buttigieg. She's not
anyone who wants it.
Medicare for all who want it. So you do not want to end private insurance.
I think that the labor movement has gained some really great ground and has a lot of, vested interest in keeping the things that they have fought for.
Yeah.
I think that there are people who are happy with their plans, although I would argue that once they experience Medicare, they may not be so happy with their plan.
But you're not going to require me or anybody else who may be happy-ish
We are a
with our
nation,
plan.
and more importantly, we are a state that values freedom and individual rights and choices.
Yeah.
And I think that anytime we're talking about taking away choices from people, it better be something that we have no other option on.
But this gets back to the thing that you didn't want to talk about earlier, which is the continuum for the party, because the Medicare for all fault line is one of the defining fault lines of this election season. Mm-hmm. Are you for Medicare for all, or are you for essentially status quo plus, which is how many people view?
Oh, I don't think it's status quo plus at all.
Yeah.
So when I was in the military, let me back up. When I was in healthcare, I was pregnant with my first child, which is a pre-existing condition, and getting laid off from my job in healthcare. Because as you guys know, Seton got bought out by Ascension. So as we were going through that transition, they were dropping our whole department.
Yep.
And I was terrified in a state that has one of the highest maternal mortality rates. Now I've got a pre-existing condition, and where am I going to get my health care from?
Yeah.
Now, I thought back to when was I taken care of the best? It was when I was military TRICARE. And then a light bulb went on, and that's actually Medicare. Right? And so I want everyone to have that option. And we have the highest uninsured rate in the country.
Double the national rate.
Not just number. Yeah. People think it's the highest number because we have so many people here in Texas. We have the highest rate. We have the highest rate of uninsured kids.
Correct.
We have literally, this legislation is killing people. The fact that we don't give them access. We have a state legislature who's specifically making it cumbersome and letting kids fall off of Medicaid even. What kind of place in hell is reserved for people who make it harder for kids to get access to health care?
So what is the public option for anybody who wants it would mean, practically speaking, what?
Practically speaking, it means every kid is on Medicare immediately in Texas, at least. But I mean, obviously, we're talking about federal legislation.
Can you pay for this? This is a question that I know is
absolutely
fashionable for people like me to ask people like you. How are you going to pay for this?
So there's a lot of ways that we're going to pay for it. First of all, I think that We keep increasing the deficit every time we grant tax breaks to the top, not even 1%, 0.1%.
So you're going to get rid of those tax breaks that were in the Trump tax bill
We
of
need
2 years ago?
to restructure the tax code. We do need to lower the tax burden on the middle class, especially the middle and lower middle
But
class.
are you going to raise taxes on people above a certain income level?
I think taxes will go up on people above a certain income level when Amazon does not pay a single dime in taxes.
Well, that was...
Then yes, taxes on those people are going to go up.
Ms. Hegar, you artfully switched to the passive voice, and I'm not going to allow it. Taxes will go up is not the same as I will raise taxes. Will you vote to raise taxes on people above a certain income?
I will insist people pay their fair share, but
Right.
I do want to point out, I don't think we should be penalizing people for making money. It's America, it's the American dream. I do think capitalism works, but only when it's regulated for greed and corruption. It's not being regulated for greed and corruption right now. So I'm not interested in punishing people for making money. I do think everyone should pay their fair share, and people are not paying their fair share right now.
Will
So
middle-class
the people-
Americans have to pay
let me
more
use
in the course of
non-passive
this?
voice. The
Yeah.
people who are not paying their fair share,
Right.
I will raise taxes on them.
Right. But will middle-class Americans have a higher tax burden in order to enable this health care program that you're advocating?
I do not support raising taxes on middle-class America.
You talk
I think
about
middle-class America gets left behind so much, and so much of the burden falls on them.
You talk about again, communications you've made to people who are interested in your campaign, aggressive action on
Climate change.
climate change.
Number one issue.
What does that mean?
I mean, I look at this as a business case. I mean, my background in business,
Yeah.
I look at the fact that Texas leads in the energy industry, and that if we want to continue leading in any industry, we cannot hold on to the past the way that Blockbuster did. We need to be the Netflix of the energy industry. And if we're going to do that, and if we're going to bring jobs to
Right.
Texas, and if we're going to create jobs, and we're going to get on renewable energy, and if we're going to make changes with mass transit, there's no plan for airplanes right now. I would like to see investment in technology that's going to reduce our carbon footprint. We have a commitment to bringing jobs to Texas and partnering with corporations. I'm going to start talking slower because I want John Cornyn to hear this, and I need to talk slowly for him. I think we should be partnering with companies to bring jobs to Texas, not based on who is donating to your campaign, but based on what is good for Texas and what is good for the industry in Texas. So I would like to see aggressive action on climate change. My purview is Texas and how it can actually also benefit Texas and keep us leading on the leading edge of the energy
You're making
industry.
an economic development case.
It is economic development. Yeah. And by the way, we're going to go extinct.
Can you sell that? Can you sell that to, again, the parts of the state that you would need to activate for your benefit politically? Can you sell this as an economic development case in the rural parts of the state where the perception may be these big city liberals want to come in and they want to essentially eliminate our ability to do what we do and our lifestyle in service to this thing that we're not even sure actually is a thing?
Rural Texas is hurting so bad right now. Yeah. They are largely wanting to hear solutions on just helping them get food on the table. So whether that's talking about agriculture and talking about how we can reduce our carbon footprint with agriculture, but also you start to see wind farms pop up, and we are actually exporting energy to other states, and there's companies coming in and buying wind farms. We have so much wind and solar potential in Texas, but there's even other outside of wind and solar, so much that's exciting in the technology coming out with renewable energy. Right. I insist that we are at the forefront of that and that we lead in that.
This is all connected. It's all of a piece.
None of it's in a silo.
Over the last couple of days, you've made a point of calling out Senator Cornyn over the death of a police officer in Houston. Fellow who went to was called to a scene. It was a domestic dispute, and was shot by the male party of the couple, and that's what happened. And Chief Acevedo in Houston called out Senator Cornyn and Senator Cruz over the Violence Against Women Act. I thought a lot about you on this specifically because of in your Doors ad, you talked about your experience as in the 2018 race, about your experience as a child with domestic violence in your house. This was a personal issue for you.
It is.
Yeah.
Very personal issue.
So explain
my biological father was abusing my family, mostly my sister and my mom. I was really young. Yeah. And my first memory, actually, is of sitting on a fireplace and watching my biological father throw my mom through a plate glass door, and then my sister hitting him with a baseball bat ineffectively because she was probably 10, 9, something like that, and then him chasing her through the dining room, through the kitchen, through the swinging door, into the living room, and around about 3 circles until he caught up with her and held her by her throat against the wall. We got out of that situation, and he threatened us with a shotgun, and we moved to Texas. And I remember that. And I remember the things that made life hard for my mom. She worked 3 jobs to try to keep us afloat.
Yep.
And I don't want people to have to suffer through that.
Right.
And I'm here to tell you, if you trade the money that can be made selling a man like that a shotgun over protecting victims of domestic violence, then you don't not only deserve a seat writing laws, you need to move out of Texas.
So the failure to support the Violence Against Women Act becomes a larger conversation than just this incident. It's more of a values conversation. I mean, and that's how you seem to be presenting
It's
it in your critique
pick
of
sides.
this. It's a pick sides thing.
Pick sides.
Right.
You have a choice.
Yep.
John Cornyn tells us who he is on a daily basis. We just have to listen.
So bio is a big part of your campaign. You've come up a number of times. I was actually thinking about you and bio over the last couple of days for another reason. So you're a decorated veteran of the Afghanistan war. Pick up the Washington Post 2 days ago, and what do we see? We see an extraordinary series, this version,
Yes.
sort of the Pentagon Papers of Afghanistan, the Washington Post publishes. And the essence of this story is that senior U.S. officials for 18 years, so across administrations, Democrat and Republican administrations, fail to tell the truth about the war. They make rosy pronouncements that they know to be false. They hide unmistakable evidence that the war was unwinnable.
Yep.
So as an Afghanistan veteran, again, major
Does that
through
sound
line
like
of your...
does that sound familiar to you?
Well, it does, but as a major through line of your bio, what's your reaction to that?
I mean, the sad part of my reaction is that I'm not surprised. Is anyone surprised? I mean, it's the same thing that happened in Vietnam. I would argue this is why we need more combat veterans in office, because those people know how to ask questions and can see through the BS. So that wasn't a surprise to me.
You think a combat veteran is more, you've mentioned this now more than once, is a combat veteran better able to be in a conversation about the prospect of sending people overseas than a civilian? Would I be less
100%.
able to litigate that than you necessarily?
Absolutely, and it's not just because we understand the awesome cost of war. We understand what we're doing when we commit boots on the ground. We also understand it's already a failure. If you commit boots on the ground, your State Department, it's a failure of diplomacy.
Did you think it was a failure when you were there?
Gutting the State Department is a slap in the face to the military and telling us that we don't need your first line of defense.
Was the war a failure when you were there?
When I
Did you
was
think
there,
that?
I was young and I was patriotic, and I still am patriotic, but I think my eyes are a little open now.
More
but
than
when
they
I
were
was
back
there,
then.
and I would argue, most, if you could bring up 20 combat vets in here, they would tell you the same thing, that when you're there, you're fighting for the person next to you. You put on the uniform. More importantly, why did you put on the uniform? Maybe not why did you go, you went because you were ordered to go. You put on the uniform to fight, to support and defend the Constitution, but to fight for American values. So I'm here to tell you, it is a surreal experience to go and bleed for our Constitution on foreign soil, defending the Constitution against a foreign enemy, and arguably trying to keep the violence off our shores, and then come home and see your own government doing things that you would be deployed to go and intervene in. The human rights atrocities that are happening in this state on our southern border sound like, if you just didn't put a country label to it, they sound like things happening in other countries where we would have to step in. To see an attack on the free press, to see an attack on our DOJ and all of the groundwork that's being laid for tyranny, holding up military dictators and things like that.
So you'd sell that experience, that combat experience then becomes a major...
The oath I took was
feature
to
of your
support and
campaign.
defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And I would argue that now I understand what a domestic threat to the Constitution looks like.
Right.
This race is me fulfilling that oath.
Let me ask you about the 2020...
But can I just add one thing? I'm sorry.
Sure.
It is important that we understand the cost of war, but it's also, here's something that a combat vet it's important. We also understand there are things worth fighting for. There are times when we have to put boots on the ground. There are things worth fighting for. I would argue pulling our troops out and abandoning the Kurds that we had partnered with was a mistake. So we have to have that balance. You have to understand there are things worth fighting for, but the awesome cost of putting boots on the ground.
Yeah, but just to that point, though, there's again, we're going to be litigating Joe Biden's vote in support of the Iraq War if he were the nominee of the party in this election. There are people in the Democratic Party who kind of, that was a fault line in the 2008 primary between Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama.
Yeah.
You know, the question of did you support the Iraq War or not? I'm asking you, would you now go back and rethink the decision to get into Iraq or get into Afghanistan based on what you know now? I mean, you, unlike most of us in this room, have experience that would.
I mean, the benefit of hindsight, I think everybody would.
But you would not
I think it's more
hesitate
important
to
to judge the actions based on the information that you had at the time.
Yeah.
Let me point out something that's super important about the time period that you're talking about.
Yeah.
When we were attacked on 9/11, and we looked at our options and tried to figure out what we were supposed to be doing, we had strong relationships with our allies. Our allies stood with us just like throughout history, throughout our nation's history since the revolution, frankly.
Yeah.
And I am terrified right now about what's going to happen when the next 9/11 happens.
You doubt that our allies would stand with us in a case like that?
I am terrified that they would hesitate to commit to stand with us. I'm not saying that they wouldn't follow through and stand with us.
Right.
But I am very concerned at the way they're being treated, the way they're being spoken to, the way world leaders are being treated and spoken to, and that the way those world leaders are responding to our leadership, that scares
What the
me.
impact to be. So a couple more quickly, and I want to go to questions from the audience. So 2020, right? The dynamic in 2020. Again, Andy Langer's podcast this week, Texas Monthly Podcast you're on. You were talking about 2020 in the presidential race and the degree to which the presidential race and the Senate race are tied to one another or not. And the phrase you used was basically, regardless of who's at the top of the ticket, I'm going to run my race. And I thought, do you really think that there's not a relationship between the presidential race and this race, that the race for Senate is not impacted by the decision made?
He's asking this question because it was framed, do you agree with Evan Smith? And I said, no.
Oh, I don't care about that. I don't agree with Evan Smith much
I
of the
said
time.
Evan Smith is 100%
Right.
wrong.
But don't you think there's a different, look, if the Democrats nominate, let me just pick, if the Democrats put Joe Biden on the top of the ticket, it's one thing. If the Democrats go to a brokered convention and the ticket is Michael Avenatti and Jussie Smollett, it's a different conversation.
Sure.
It does matter who the ticket is.
It has an impact. It has the least amount of impact as it has in a generation, I would argue, for a couple reasons.
Oh, I'm not sure I agree with that. You think
One,
so, really?
because we don't have straight party ticket voting. So when you look at approval ratings and you see a wide differentiation between Ted Cruz, Donald Trump, and John Cornyn on approval rating, you're talking, what you're saying is that you think people are going to go into a booth to vote for the president and they will also vote for John Cornyn. I argue for the first time in a long time, that is less likely to happen.
You think that Trump is likely to have more votes from Republicans than Cornyn?
Oh, 100%, yeah. They're going to go in, the other reason I think that there's less of an impact is because if people are only focused on the presidential race, they tend to be lower informed voters. So without the straight party ticket vote, there's a lot of people who are supporting this president specifically because they thought he would upturn the apple cart, specifically because they don't like politicians, and those people are less likely to go all the way down and vote down ballot. People are going to go into the ballot box and vote for me over John Cornyn because they're going to go into the ballot box knowing that they have a choice between somebody who serves their donors and their party leadership or someone who serves their community, someone who has bled for the Constitution, someone who is a working mom who has faced the challenges that they've faced. When they know that, I mean, that's the goal of the campaign.
So that's regardless
That's all I want them to know.
Regardless of who the presidential nominee. I mean, the theory is that if the presidential nominee is
It'll
one
have some
kind of
impact.
nominee,
Sure.
you drive a lot more Democrats out and you have independents and persuadable Republicans potentially think to themselves, well, we have a choice here. If you have a more predictable outcome with the party's nominee, somebody who sets up more like a Democrat people have been used to seeing at the top of the ticket in Texas going back to the last time that Texas was legitimately competitive, the theory is maybe that there's less of an opportunity to get more people over to the Democratic side. You think the lack of straight ticket voting, though, mitigates that?
I think it partly mitigates it.
Yeah.
I think the fact that voting for this president doesn't necessarily mean voting Republican for the first time in a while, I think that impacts it.
Yeah.
More importantly, I think me being on the ballot, somebody who is not independently wealthy, somebody who is, middle class, somebody who was raised in rural Texas and is a combat vet, they've never had that choice on the ballot before. And so I think if they walk into the ballot box with that choice,
so that's the difference,
regardless of who's at the top of the ticket.
Right. So the math on this race is interesting. The last time Cornyn was on the ballot, which is 2014, he runs against a dentist from Dallas, first-time candidate, last-time candidate, who had been a Democratic donor, David Alamiel. He beats Alamiel by almost 27 points. The average margin in the statewide races over the last 25 years has been more like 15 to 20.
Yeah.
O'Rourke gets the margin down against Cruz by 90%.
Right.
So you're talking about Cornyn getting 61% of the vote the last time he ran. How do you make the math work?
Well,
What do
that
you
was
ha-
a
what do you have to
smaller
do- what
that
do
was
you
a
have to do?
smaller margin than the one that I, faced in my congressional.
Yeah.
So if I can move the needle as much as I did in the congressional, then I win.
Right, but
When
running
you do the
statewide,
math.
as you well know, running statewide is different from running in Williamson and Bell counties.
Right.
South Oak Cliff and McAllen and
Right, but if you wanna get-
Lufkin are different than Bell and Williamson counties.
If you want to get nerdy Politico data,
Come on,
which that's what I'm here to do, right?
go.
When I think of that phrase,
We
your
have all
face
day.
pops up in my head. The partisan index of my congressional district was R+10. The state is an R+8. So if we use the R+10 district, which ideologically, urban and rural, is very similar to the rest of the state, although the district is less demographically diverse. If you apply the math, if my partisan index had been R+8 in my congressional district, I would have won.
Yeah.
So, I think that the math is certainly in our
In that
favor.
respect, you think the 31st is a microcosm of the opportunity or the challenge you have?
I was raised in that district.
Yeah.
I do believe it's relatively representative. It's agricultural and urban, and it's got Dell
It's got
computers, but it's
suburbs,
got
right,
So I definitely think
Yeah.
I learned a lot in that race. I think we accomplished a lot in that race. I think it's about the same thing. It's about the world being on fire and trying to protect my kids. This is all just a real
Right.
overreaction to the fact that I can't wrap them in bubble tape and keep them in the house forever.
We all want that, right? Last thing, you mentioned I'm middle class, I regular text, and I don't have access to a lot of wealth.
Yeah.
Right now, John Cornyn has outraised all of you combined, right? What are you going to need to run the race that you need to run if you're the nominee? This is the challenge.
I'm going to need everyone listening to lock arms with me and to bring 5 friends, and we need to all march in the same direction.
How much? Beto raised more than $70 million.
I don't know how much we
What's
need.
it going to take?
I am 100% confident we will have the resources we need, and here's
Because
why.
this is an expensive state to run a statewide
We are
campaign.
a little bit lower than where Beto was fundraising here, and he raised quite a bit.
Quite a lot.
Okay. But we're about there. We are raising millions of dollars. We have tens of thousands of donors. We have a very high percentage of unitemized small dollar donations. Those small dollar donations are the ones that stay with you and build the foundation of your campaign.
Yeah.
That ability to generate that kind of grassroots enthusiasm has me so confident that we are in this for the long haul and we are sustainable. It would be different if I was putting my own money in,
Right.
and if it was all high dollar donors, which can only write one check. I'm here to tell you, I am handing out ass whoopings and lollipops, and I am all out of lollipops. We are going to raise the money we need. We are going to turn out the vote that we need. We are going to talk to the people we need. We are going to drive all over this state for the next year, and we are going to send John Cornyn off to take his 3 taxpayer-funded pensions.
But if I'm a Democratic donor and the choice is being put in front of me, support Cory Gardner's opponent in Colorado or support John Cornyn's opponent in Texas, or the choice is support somebody, Mark Kelly in Arizona running against Martha McSally, or support the woman state senator running against Susan Collins in Maine, or the person running against Joni Ernst. Why would my money be better spent in Texas than in one of those other states where arguably the Democrats, at least the perception is, have a better shot of taking back control of that on the way to taking back control of the Senate? Why are you a better investment than them?
Big states that are expensive, they are safely this or safely red or safely blue until they're not. Because they're expensive and because the party that feels safe takes them for granted. It's happened all over. It's happened in California. They used to be red, now they're blue. It happened in Texas. We were blue, we used to be red. I'm here to tell you we should be supporting Texas because we have an opportunity to win. Yes, we have an opportunity to win a Senate seat and maybe actually get the Senate back to work, back earning their paychecks, back working for us and putting things to a vote. But also because we have an ability to do real good with our state legislature. We have 38 electoral votes. If there is multiple large, we have the second most electoral votes in the country. If we have multiple large states that are blue, then there's no path to victory for a Republican president. So we absolutely should be investing in places like Texas, where we can make the biggest impact.
This is the game changer.
Texas can, and this is how it should be,
Right,
by the
yeah.
way, Texas can turn the direction of the nation. And that's why I'm running against John Cornyn.
We'll take questions for a couple minutes. Said we'd go a little bit long because we started a little bit late. We're not going to take too many, but we'll take as many as we can. Sir.
Hi.
Thanks for being here. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Last night on the NewsHour, a representative from NOAA talked about the massive loss of ice in Greenland. He said it's equivalent in volume to 2,000 elephants going into the ocean per second.
Yep.
Texas already has massive losses because of climate change.
Yeah.
Will the nation continue to offer millions and billions of dollars in subsidies to the fossil fuel industry, and what can you do about that?
No, I don't think we should. And I do think that this is something that Texans are concerned about. This idea that Texans don't care about or don't believe in climate change, or even there's people ask me, how do you talk about this in Houston? And I say, well, Houston's the easiest place to talk about it. First of all, because people want jobs and they understand that the future is in investing in future technology, right? But secondly, because they're facing these once in 1,000 years floods every year, catastrophic hurricanes and floods. Not only that, really effective people who can build broad coalitions can look at someone in a room or a different part of the state and figure out what it is that would make that room get on board. There are many reasons to get on board with aggressive action against climate change. And sometimes I'm in a room where we're talking about protecting our kids from, allowing our kids to have kids, right? That's a terrifying thought, is what's the planet going to look like for my kids' kids, right? But in some rooms, it's an economic issue. Some rooms, we talk about the weather. And in some rooms, we have to talk about, it's a national security crisis. The Pentagon has labeled it, a huge threat to national security. We're talking about global migration and food shortages and things like that. And really,
right.
We just need to paint the whole picture for people.
Had you sat in that middle seat between the Cornyns and you had this conversation with the Cornyns the other night, what he would say back to you is 14% of the Texas economy is tied back to the oil and gas sector directly, and as much as 30% indirectly. And if you end subsidies to fossil fuel providers, Texas is the largest producer of crude oil in the country, you are putting the economy of the state, which has been a leader among the 50 states, at risk. What do you say back to that?
I say that means there's a lot of people at risk of losing their job because everyone but you can see the writing on the wall that this is the direction we're going. And if this is the direction we're going and we're going to leave all of those people behind, they're all going to lose their jobs eventually if we are not leading in the energy industry and thinking ahead and being Netflix instead of accepting
So it's
being Blockbuster.
climate change and chill. That's what we're looking at, actually. You're right. You keep making the Netflix reference. Okay, right, Mr. Richards, and then this gentleman in the front, and then we're just going to stop at that point. Sir.
There's a bill in the House of Representatives now, H.R. 763, the Energy Innovation and Climate and Carbon Dividend Act, which would put a tax on fossil fuels and thereby accelerate the transition from fossil fuels to renewables. What's different about this one is that all the revenue from the tax is returned to the American people in the form of equal dividends. Would you support such a bill if it were introduced in the Senate?
So I am always careful to answer whether or not I would support a bill if I haven't read it, okay? Because from what you're talking about, it sounds like the type of thing I would support. I will say that we have to be careful passing on the burden to the middle class, which when we tax things that increase the cost of food and things like that, we do have to be careful. So I am not for increasing the burden on the middle class. I think that there are people who need to carry that burden that are not consumers of milk in the middle class. But I'm going to support aggressive action on climate change.
You're open to listening to it.
I'm going to read it
Right.
after this meeting, yeah.
All right, so gentleman in the front, for the people who can't see, is wearing an MJ Hegar hat. And so let's just hope that the question is not, why are you so awesome? Oh, it's over here. Okay. Good. Yeah.
Wade doesn't have a voice today, so I'm going to answer it for him.
Sorry about that.
Beto said he is confident you can beat Cornyn. Have you had any conversations with Beto regarding your Senate run?
Yeah, I talked to him last night.
You did?
Yeah, and he is going to, I mean, I don't want to speak for him. I think we need to acknowledge the amazing work that's been done in this state for the last, several decades, but obviously last cycle.
Yep.
And we need to also stop trying to stand on each other's shoulders and actually start standing on our own 2 feet and moving forward and talking to people. I am really excited that I have the kind of relationship with him that I can ask him for his advice and say, what do you think of this?
Do you ask him for his endorsement?
I did not, and I will not do that to him. I will not put him in that position, and I don't think he would give it to me anyway.
A whole bunch of his people endorsed a different candidate in this race in the last couple of days.
Oh, well, I'm not going to take shots, even though you think you can force me to, at other Democrats. But
I do think I can. You're right.
I'm here to tell you, I want to make sure that I'm not painting it like I have access to him or support from him that other candidates don't. I think he's the type of servant leader that would answer the phone for anybody on the ticket and would give any of them advice. I did happen to talk to him last night. I'm glad that he's still engaged and still fighting for this state. And I'm glad that, you know, he also is the kind of person that isn't going to take shots at other Democrats.
If you become the nominee, will you campaign? Would you ask him to campaign with you? Would he be
I
an
mean,
asset to you in a general election race?
When I become the nominee, I'm going to be getting support from all sorts of places, and there's very few places that I will turn away support from.
Okay. If you're the nominee, come back and do this again, okay?
Will do.
All right, thank you,
Thank
MJ
you so
Hegar.
much,
Thank
Evan.
you all.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you so
Great.
much.
Thank you very much for coming.
Yes.
Enjoyed it.
We Thank you.
Happy holidays
So
to your
sorry that we
family.
were late.
That's okay. Good. We're
All
good.
right.
Good.